Good afternoon, Michael Robinson here with another week's tip from the pro. This week's going to have a little different theme, and it's not going to be on our swing techniques or how to get the ball closer, but I'm going to talk a little bit about the topic of managing expectations. I play golf with a lot of the members, and I see a lot of people really struggling to stay positive and feel good about what they're doing, and I think most of that is due to expectations not really lining up with skill set. I'm going to talk about stats from the PGA Tour. I'm a big stats guy. It doesn't necessarily always pertain to your game since we're not on tour, we're at the amateur level. But I think this is going to give you a feel for a little bit more about what a realistic expectation is. So most of you, when you're chipping, expect to get it to 2 or 3 feet. Not really the case. From chipping from 10 to 20 yards on the PGA Tour, it's an average of 6.5 feet. Now, an average is obviously made up of a bunch of shots. So 6.5 feet is made up of a few at 3 and a few at 9 and some at 2 and some at 10. We're not going to chip everyone close. I think this is a good example, but even more important to you all is that from 125 to 150 yards, we're going to see that the PGA Tour average is 23 feet from the pin. 23 feet from 125 to 150 is mostly done with a pitching wedge or maybe a 9-iron. For most of you, 125 to 150 yards is more like a 7 or 8 iron. So if we look at where the pros hit a 7 or 8 iron, it's more like 150 to 175, and it's actually 28 feet. So if the pros are hitting it to 28 feet, which is roughly 9 yards from their target, you've got to be a little more realistic and say, okay, 40 feet. 40 feet is probably a pretty good shot for most of you. And I'm not saying that you can't hit some to PGA Tour averages, but if this is okay for them, 40 feet's got to be okay for you. Here's the other thing is that if 40 feet is your tolerance level from something like 100 to 125 yards, we've got to pick really good targets. I've always wanted to do a study where I go out and pull every pin out of every cup out there and have you all play golf, hitting it to the center of the green. I have a feeling a lot of your scores would be a little bit better than they currently are. Know what your capabilities are, feel good about the shots you hit great, but don't always put yourself down when you haven't hit a great shot. We saw Jordan Spieth hit a tree with his driver and leave himself 215 yards into the playoff hole at Travelers last week, when in regulation he hit it dead down the center, he had 115 yards. Now Jordan could have kicked himself and put himself down and made a mess of the hole, but he didn't. He stayed realistic. He said, okay, let me hit it up there. He got it into the bunker and he holed out his bunker shot. Too often I'm out playing with members and they hit a shot and it's, oh man, I can't believe I just did that. Or wow, I should have hit it closer. It's not always the case, and it's not worth making yourself feel upset. Let's switch roles to putting a little bit, because I know most of you expect to make every 5 and 6 and 7 footer that you look at. On the PGA Tour, the 50-50 spot for whether or not they're going to make a putt is 8 feet. 8 feet. So if that's the PGA Tour, maybe you're 30% from 8 feet. From 5 feet, we're 77% on the PGA Tour. So that's roughly 3 out of 4 putts made. This is the area that you all could be as good as the pros, just like I talked about in our last video on distance control with the metronome. Work hard on your putting, because every time you chip it into these PGA Tour averages, we still have to make putts. Hopefully you found this enjoyable and important, and I'll bring you another good video next week, but really think about what you're saying to yourself and how you feel after you hit each golf shot in the next few days. Enjoy the day.